we used to talk about the next billion people coming onto the internet being in Africa and being connected. That story has changed quite fundamentally over the last 4 years, because it was just about the next billion people coming from, because the only next billion people that's going to be connected to the internet comes from Africa. There is no other place with the next billion people to be connected. But the difference is that when these people get connected, they don't just get connected to broadband and information highways. They're getting connected to disparate species of artificial intelligences. And that human-machine symbiosis is a very interesting thing to observe, because AIs unlock and they feed into latent human potential. And I think that is quite interesting, because when we have this human mass applied to some of our biggest problems in the world, I think we're going to see cancer being solved. I think we're going to see some of those big challenges that we have. And I think it's going to come from the African continent. A lot of people say, will the next Twitter come from here? Will the next Facebook come from here? Will the next Google come from here? I don't think so. I think the next Facebook of agriculture will. I think the next Yahoo of financial services will. Because I think what we challenged with here is fairly different from a technological perspective versus just building something where someone can click the like button. Sorry, that was like a huge segue.
But when you talk about solving problems, one of the sessions that I went to Davos this year, Davos is usually in January, the last week of January, but this year, because of COVID, they had it in May. And there weren't as many people as per usual, because I suppose some people were still a little bit concerned about Omicron. And that enabled me to get into a session on quantum computing, which I knew nothing about, and I only know a little about now, having spent an hour listening to these guys. But in Davos, they get the best in the world on it. And what they were explaining there was that because it is such a accelerated computer processor, that those questions that to us are impossible to answer at the moment. Why do birds fly? How do they know? What is their ability to fly from South Africa to Europe without actually having a GPS like we would need? Where does that come from? And many of those other questions, which are completely unsolvable today, you mentioned cancer, will become of the past. And just sketch a little bit of that for us. What quantum computing, how it's going to change our world, and how far is it?
Look, I think it's here. I think I love that quote that says the future is already here, just unevenly distributed. It's so true. And I think quantum computing, people at IBM are messing around with it. The Chinese have some elements of it. But I think when you take a look at computing, when we talk about quantum computing, we normally segue into intelligence. And when we define intelligence, we always have this linear view of intelligence. We think about a squirrel that can remember where it buried its food, and we say that's an IQ of X. And then we move to a chimpanzee, and it has more cognitive capability, and we say, well, that's an IQ of Y, X plus Y. And then we get to a dumb guy, and then we say, okay, he's got an IQ of this. And then we get all the way to Einstein, and we say IQ of that. And then we define intelligence in that way. But intelligence is not really in the real world applied in that way. That's not, when you take that intelligence and you take that cognition and you take the human brain, it never works in that way. It's never one person. It's always combinatorial. It's always collective. So organizations are collective, are forms of coagulated intelligence. It's collective that comes together. You've got HR, you've got marketing, you've got finance. Those collective intelligences, when they combine, they solve incredible problems. And we'll just give you an example. You take a pen on a table. You pick up a pen and you say, can anyone in this room make this pen? Can anyone explain how to make this? If you really I did this the other day with my kids. If you take a look at a spoon, look at a pen, a pencil, the mining, the technology that went into the mining of the raw materials, all the way through to the manufacturing and ultimately the delivery of that, our combinatorial capability as a species, that collective intelligence is actually our power. Now, coming back to the notion of quantum computing, we always think about we're going to give this quantum computer a huge data lake or disparate repositories of data sets, and we're going to feed it in and it's going to give us an outcome. I think where it's really good is linear applications. Watson being able to disseminate radiological information better than any radiologist. That's profound. Blue playing against Kasparov and beating him. We saw the Go game with the Google guys, right? Playing that game, I forget the name now, and thinking up more moves. But But that's not its true potential, and that's not its true applicability. And what I mean by that is, it is the best form of a radiologist is when you take that cognition that the machine has and you combine it with organic cognition. When inorganic cognition meets organic cognition, then you get the best derivative. So the best radiologist in the world is a radiologist with Watson. The best chess player in the world is not Kasparov playing against blue and beat. No, the best is a centaur. It's when you take an AI and you combine it with a chess player, and that derivative is a centaur, and they play against each other. It's called centaur leagues. So I think when you look at quantum computing, it's fascinating to see a machine take data sets and compute it and think about trillion moves and trillion derivatives and give us answers. The question is, how do we apply this in our day-to-day, and how do we build businesses that are better, et cetera? So, and this, I think, is a governmental issue, so we can get to that in a second, where you can take huge data sets from the population, and you give it to a quantum computer, and you can spit out predictive analytics that are dystopian. I mean, I'll give you a very simple example. Give me your macro card if you shop at Macro. Give me the inside swab of your cheek. I can feed that into a quantum computer, and with a little bit of your DNA and a chemical composition makeup of what your grocery bill looks like over a very short 3-month period of time, I can predict what lifestyle diseases you're prone to have. Boom, 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 boom. Right? You can get dystopia instantaneously. So those are interesting applications. But I think from a business perspective, and I think from a societal perspective, what's more interesting is the notion of disparate species of intelligences coming together and creating things that we've never seen before. So to give you a practical example, the most valuable companies in the world today, let's call them quantum computers. I mean, Google's PageRank is a quantum computer. There is no human being inside of Google that can explain PageRank anymore. Right? The way Amazon's AWS...
What is PageRank?
Okay, so PageRank is the algorithm that indexes content on the internet and then prioritizes that. So when you search for something, it is the intelligence that stacks that data relative to relevancy. Its fitness function is relevancy. Like Facebook's fitness function in their quantum computer is engagement. And when I was at Google, it was relevancy. Everything that we built was relevancy. So when you go and you type, Google wanted to give you information so rapidly, so quickly, and kick you away, so you never come back. Because then they defined in the algorithm that information was so relevant and therefore so valuable. And that was their fitness function. So their quantum computer derives value in that way. So they sell ads based upon that, etc. But no one inside of Google can truly understands PageRank. No one inside of Amazon understands AWS and how
because artificial intelligence has taken over?
Yeah. Those Google employees work for machines.
Wow.
They don't work for... Yes, there's an organizational structure, but in an inverse way, they look a lot like Uber on the inside. Like an Uber driver, who does an Uber driver work for? Think about that for a second. I'm jumping around a bit, but let me just take a step back. If you take a look at Google, Google's like an inverse of Uber. So when we worked at Google, the algorithm would tell us where to put servers. It would tell us how much it needed. It would tell us how to create inventory from an advertising perspective. When we walked into meetings and we spoke to marketeers, we would feed the keywords relative to that business into the AI, and it would spit out predictive data sets that it was profound. And people would just spend money relative to that because the machine would just tell them that would be the definitive outcome. So we were really not working for Larry and Sergey. We were working for this thing in the machine, and the machine was telling us how to curate what we needed to do and present it to people. So that is no different from like an Uber driver. And if you take a look at Google, Google's outpaced now, because Google is a platform business that applies quantum mechanics to solve problems that no group of humans could ever solve. There's no group of humans that could get together and do what the PageRank quantum engine does. It just doesn't exist. We can't do it. Just like no one can figure out the NASDAQ algorithms. But if you take a look at Google, it's a business of today, and it's in trouble. Because businesses have popped up that are more businesses of right now. And what I mean by that is when the plane landed in the Hudson River in New York, you all remember that event, right?
Scully.
Yeah, Scully. I was at Google at the time. I think I was still at Google at the time. Or I remember being engaged with the team that watched that. And what shocked us was that information, as the plane landed in the river, wasn't inside of Google. You couldn't Google it at that very moment. It was inside of Twitter. It was inside of Facebook. And that very moment we realized, oh my God, we are a business of today, not a business of right now. And consumers want businesses of right now. They don't want businesses of today. You know, people they don't engage with data. We engage with streams of information persistently. You know, Facebook wall is a stream of information, a Twitter stream, an Instagram feed. These are things that take time away. And Google struggled with that. So Google's struggling. So if you take a look at it from a social media perspective, but if you take a look at it organizationally speaking, we're seeing new derivatives of organizations relative to this quantum mechanics. And I think Uber is a brilliant example of this. Like Uber, like the Google employees are subject to the algorithms, and they work for the algorithms, and the algorithms actually define your KPIs inside of Google when I was there. If you fast forward to today, and you kind of see the accentuation of this on the outside of a business. So what happened inside of Google suddenly is now happening on the outside. And what I mean by that is, take a look at Uber. An Uber driver shows up at Uber at their head office at Parktown North. Is a guy from Malawi. He doesn't even know Johannesburg. Rings the bell, says, here's my citizenship, or here's my proof of residence, here's my Toyota Corolla, brand new. I don't have a criminal record. They do a background check on him. They don't even ask him, do you know Joburg? Do you know how to get from A to B? They don't ask him anything. They do a background check. He's got a valid car. They check it, and they give him a number, a unique identifier. And then he leaves. He never goes back there again. And what he does is he puts his little glowing rectangle onto his dashboard. He puts that identifier that the species of algorithms understands. He puts that in, and then it tells him when to go stand and park, direction, turn by turn, avoiding traffic to catch the most amount of rides in a day. And when you get into that cab, that human being just swipes, and then a machine tells that human being where to get from A to B in the shortest. That's profound. Now the difference is when you have the Uber app, and I'm going to make the point now in a second, getting to quantum computing. When you have the Uber app in your hand, that's when the magic happens. That's when we're seeing businesses that are not platform businesses like the businesses that are the most highly valued today, which is Amazon, Microsoft, Facebook, etc. We're seeing new forms of businesses that don't own assets. They're redefining the way we look at the world through an MBA lens. Like MBAs have to be retrained when they come into my sector because the way they define capital finance is completely redefined. Why? Because define Uber, define Airbnb. These are businesses that own nothing, but have valuations that are extraordinary. The assets are intangible. They don't own the drivers. They don't own the car. In fact, now, some of the data centers they don't even own. And when you take the Uber app and you put it on your phone, that's when something magical happens. And I think we take it so for granted today that this is possible, that when you take your Uber app and you install it on your phone, and you know when you click yes, 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 you never read the end user license agreement. You give up all that privacy, but it's okay because you get a magical experience. But when you install that application on your phone, you are constantly federating your longitude, latitude to it all the time. So you become a part of Uber. So as much as the driver is subject to the algorithm, you have now become a part of not a big data thing. You've become part of an algorithmic marketplace. You are federating your geospatial awareness into a machine, and that machine can give you a magical experience. So sometimes when you catch a ride, you'll see it says surge pricing, like it's more expensive now. Why is that happening? Because the algorithm understands, or the algorithms, the quantum mechanics inside of it understands that you are asking for a ride, but the density of cabs in your proximity is low. You know what it does? As soon as you ask for a ride, it says surge pricing, you accept it. It creates a honeybee effect. As they start their engines and they move closer to you, those Uber drivers, the pricing goes back down again. That orchestration, that undulance that happens, nobody in Uber understands that. Nobody in Uber can articulate
but
that.
now, I'm just hoping we aren't losing everybody here. So I want to try and get it back to...
Okay, no, so what I mean is,
Earth.
when we talk about quantum computing, we shouldn't define things in this linear way, like we shouldn't define intelligence in a linear way. I think quantum computing is similar. Like when you look at a machine in the corner that has incredible GPU capability, so it has the ability to crunch data unlike anything we've seen before. That is fascinating. But the applicability of that in the real world is more combinatorial. And businesses, if you fast forward to make the point, quantum mechanics is already there. And it's giving us not a taxi company with an app. It is giving us a business that's an algorithmic marketplace that makes transportation available like liquid water. That's what they say. So anywhere in the world you go, you can flick it and you can get a cab to show up in 3 to 5 minutes, anywhere in the world. When I was in Sao Paulo the other day. If I need an Uber to get from point A to B, I just flick it. It knows where I am. It gets me a cab. I don't even have to speak the person's name. He doesn't have to know who I am. It's an incredible service.
And it is an incredible picture that you've painted for us of the way that the world over there operates. But here, you can walk 500 meters out of the gate and you'll have people who don't have cell phones, or certainly don't have that connectivity. Mm-hmm. Is this going to make the rich richer, mm-hmm. the poor poorer, mm-hmm. and the digital divide bigger?
So let me say it the way Tim O'Reilly says it. Someone said, or ever, and I'm going to answer that question now because it triggered me too. I like what Tim O'Reilly says. He says, if the machines do displace us, and they do I'm paraphrasing, if they do take away our jobs, it won't be because of the machines. It will be because of a lack of imagination on behalf of leadership. It doesn't have to be that way. Yes, that is definitively the potential outcome. A quantum AI is a superpower. It really, really is a superpower. But its kryptonite is inequality, right? And we need to be careful because when Milton Friedman gave us a fitness function in the early 70s, he said, and I'm paraphrasing, the sole responsibility of an organization is to derive value for its shareholders. He gave us that fitness function, and I'll argue that that's the fitness function that you get taught when you do your MBA. That's the fitness function that the NASDAQ algorithm and the Dow Jones runs against in every stock exchange in the world. Every leader and every business is subject to that fitness function. And when you apply all of these artificial intelligences, all this quantum mechanics to that, you do get a potential dystopian outcome. Yes, we are seeing businesses doing so much more with so much less humanity. And like what Yuval Noah says, I think the danger that we live in today is not, the rich exploiting the poor. It is when the poor are irrelevant to the rich. That is profound, right?
Where are we in this whole situation in South Africa? And I'll just share something with you. I had a fascinating interview with a guy called Charlie Robertson a couple of weeks ago. He's written a book called The Time Traveling Economist. Mm. And effectively, what he's done is he's taken the whole world and he breaks it down to 3 things. Only 3 things give you a rate of development. The one is electricity. The second one is population growth. And the third one is adult literacy. Now, on all 3 of those, South Africa scores okay. Not on electricity at the moment, but okay relative to other countries in the world. Mm-hmm. But South Africa, he says, of all the countries, underperforms most. Yeah. And he doesn't know why that is the case. Now we're looking at this world that you're talking about, the latent potential that we see around us in the other human beings around us. Yeah. And yet we can't even get that basic thing right here. Help us. Okay. How can you give us some hope for the future here?
I think I'm going to take a more positive view. I would argue that it is happening. I have a purview because I sit on the board of the CSIR. I do have access through those annals to the presidency, and I get pulled into certain things, behind closed doors. And I think we're doing amazing things. But outside of, from a legislative or government perspective, I do think that we need to bring leaders along. I think our leadership in the country is an indictment on the technology industry. I think we haven't done a proper job as an industry to articulate the political capital that exists in technology. We just haven't done it. They go to the...
What do you mean by that?
Well, they go to the World Economic Forum and they come back and they just talk about 4IR, right? And then Julius Malema asks, tell me what the third IR was. And then they stumped.
They don't know what the third IR is.
They don't know what it is. And I think that's the challenge that we have. We have... so we need to translate that. But that's a different discussion for a different day. Let's talk about it purely from a kind of ICT sector perspective. I think it's happening. I do think he's absolutely right. I do think we underperform. But I don't think I think that's a short-term analysis. I think we need to take a look at what happens in the longer term. And you got to take a look at things like Moore's Law. You got to take a look at telcos, business models. Telecommunications business models are metamorphosizing at the moment. We seem to have, there's something strange happening. We've got retailers, telecommunications companies, traditional banks morphing in what I call into something that's like a digital clash of civilizations. Like, if you go to F&B, what is F&B relative to Vodacom? You can get everything at F&B that you can get at Vodacom. And Vodacom is transforming into a business where all the financial services that traditional banks would give, they're starting to give you that more and more in their portfolio. You're seeing retailers like ShopRite starting to enable themselves more and more in that. And then you've got this crypto world that's coming along that enables a complete dematerialization of all three of those industries, where I don't need any one of them because I'm a sovereign individual.
slowly.
Okay.
Unpack that slowly, because that's quite profound as well.
Okay, so if you take a look at business models today, a telco's business model was solely defined a decade ago on data, on voice.
So in other words, you've picked up the phone and you phoned somebody, either with your landline or with a cell phone.
Yeah, and that voice revenue was their focal point, and that was about getting as many people connected to a glowing rectangle on my network so they could make a call, right? That business has, the attrition in that business is it's astonishing. I mean, it outpaces Moore's Law in terms of cost of data, on and on and on.
And Moore's Law?
Is every 18 months processor speed doubles and the price halves. We'll get to that a little bit later.
No, but just that's like a fact.
Okay.
There's a thing called Moore's Law, that every 18 months, whatever power you have today is going to double and the price is going to halve.
Right.
So if you think you've got a stable business, my colleagues say to me, geez, but why are we having to change again? Why do we have to do things differently? Well, Moore's Law is hard at work in media and other parts as well. It's just important to unpack these things sometimes.
So that's the rate of change of innovation. I mean, on a chipset and a microprocessor with silicon. But getting back to the business model. So it was voice. You're seeing them getting into the world. They got into the world of data. And now data is also an attrition world, right? It's a race to the bottom. So voice has always been a race to the bottom. Data is now a race to the bottom. Cheapest. So they're trying to innovate and invent things that add value above the connection line, above the data line. So the over-the-top layers like Google and Facebook. So when the problem that MTN and Vodacom have is when you switch on your phone, you don't really engage with their services outside of being connected. You immediately go to an over-the-top layer. You go to Google, you go to Facebook, you go to Twitter, you go to some other application service. You're not engaging with them organically, and they're trying to get to you. And what everyone is chasing after is that store of value. If I can be the store of value, if I can be the place where value is stored, then I can federate transactions.
So if you can be the bank?
Bank is too simple.
Okay.
I think
what is a store of value?
Well, it's a store of value. It's where your credits live. It's where your money lives, yes. But it's where your identity lives. It's where your authentication lives. It's where...
And at the moment, that's in a bank.
That's in a bank, that's in Google, that's in Facebook, that's in PayPal, that's everywhere else but beside in your telco. What telcos are trying to do is they're trying to go above the stack to get closer and closer to you. Now, we're seeing this happen, and I would argue that if you take a look at MTN and Vodacom, they look more like transaction enablers than they are voice enablers or even data enablers. They are transaction enablers. And their business models are now morphing where they are realizing if the cost of the device goes down and I transaction enable, then it makes sense to give the device away. And if you keep going down that road, then you see a road where penetration of devices and connectivity is no longer the challenge.
Got it.
Right now, when everyone's connected, what's the business model then? And I think they're already thinking about that. I mean, I'm on the board of the Discovery Bank, so I know that this is an organic challenge. They're all looking at each other, but they're also looking at how the consumer's changing. And the consumer, this thing in our hands, I keep telling people, don't call that a phone. Right? If you call it a phone, then you misunderstand it. And for those of you that are tired, it's a peripheral sensory real-time rendering engine. It's not a phone, because if you define it that way, then you misunderstand what's happening. So the answer is, what are we going to do in South Africa? What happens with the poor guy sitting, 500 meters outside the gate here? What does he do? I'm very optimistic about his future because I see telcos giving him a phone. In the next 36 months, pick up your most powerful iPhone or Android phone in your hand. In the next 36 months, that will be a prepaid, entry-level phone in the prepaid market. Now work backwards. Now imagine your iPhone's capability with no data cost barrier in the next 4 to 5 years. Hyper-penetration relative to that. And then you come along and then you enable value exchange like Bitcoin does. Then the world looks very different all of a sudden. Like suddenly, there is no such thing as an LSM in the traditional sense because the guy in Guguletu has as much access to information, technological power, AIs, quantum computing, and transaction and value exchange like you do. I mean, think about it today. From a dematerialization perspective, but also think about it, there's a couple of books written about this too, but Elon Musk can't buy a better iPhone than I can. Like rich people can't actually buy more computing or more feature sets than the man in the street today. That is, if you just stop and think about that for a second, that's profound. Now, if that hyper accelerates over the next 3 to 5 years, what happens then? And so I am more optimistic that we will unlock that latent human potential in Guguletu, in Eldorado Park, in Soshanguve, and all those places that we know. And that's the promise of this new network, not the internet, this new derivative. Now, just to kind of clinch the nail on that point, there's Moore's law, but then there's another law that we all ignore. And this one's going to have a bigger effect than Moore's law in the next 36 months. And that is storage capacity. And it's a very simple law, and I can't say the guy's name because he's from the Nordic countries, and I can't type his name on my keyboard either because I can't find those symbols. But he works at IBM. And about 20 years ago, no more, maybe 30 years ago, he defined a very simple law. He said, storage capacity on a device doubles, but its form factor stays the same every 13 months. So every 13 months, storage capacity on a device doubles, but its form factor stays the same.
Form factor?
It's ergonomic. So let's say, take your phone.
This is like an iPhone.
Just take an iPhone.
Yeah.
Every 13 months, go back to the very first iPhone that was shown to us in 2007. Up until today, you'll see every 13 months, storage capacity on the phone doubles, but its form factor stays the same. Now, if this keeps going, this has profound architectural impacts for the internet. Because the internet today is a machine that has got big fat clouds, thin pipes, and then windows in our hands that we gain access to. That is an ineffective architecture when you look through the lens of someone sitting at Soshanguve. Because it's expensive, it's a thin pipe, and it's a fat cloud. You can't gain access to that. But when storage capacity on the edges of the network suddenly gets to the tipping point where in the next 36 months, you will have a phone with the storage capability to store all the information that's on the internet today. Let me say that again, right? And this is probably a more optimistic. Let's in the next 3 to 5 years. Let's make it 3 to 5 years. In the next 3 to 5 years, you will have a phone that will have the capability to store all the information that you have on the internet today in the palm of your hand. Now imagine if you could take a snapshot of every single website, every single piece of content, everything, every book, every song, and you had a snapshot of that, and it was stored in your hand, and you were disconnected from it. That has profound impacts on business models. That has profound impacts on how the internet works. Then we move less from, thin device, thin pipe, fat cloud. Then we move into a world where we see mass data translation, and that's nature. It looks like osmosis or metamorphosis. Nature translates incredible amounts of data overnight, based on sunlight, based on energy, etc. When you start having devices in your hand that has an osmotic relationship with this thing called a disconnected, decentralized network, that means knowledge dispersion, technological capabilities on the edge are profound. And that will unlock latent human potential, unlike what we've never seen before. So social media has unlocked human expression. right? The ability for you to go to a social media site and put up your picture of your kid, and then someone clicks the like button. All of you do it. In fact, you do it so much that Kevin Kelly did a study over the last 2 years that the majority of internet traffic is giving, not taking. Let me say that again. The majority of what happens on the internet is giving. It's you and I on the edges of the network, taking selfies, opinions, social, all the things that we do. We're federating, we're casting digital information shadows into this thing all the time. And that's the majority of the activity on the internet. It doesn't happen inside the network, it happens on the edges. Now, if the edge suddenly has a business model, and suddenly has the technology catch up, and then you've got this storage capacity, and then you melt it in with Moore's law, then you see a metamorphosis like we saw between 1999 and probably 2010. And then again from like 2007 till 2020. I think that's, in the next 3 to 5 years, we'll see another big pivotal jump. And new businesses, new competitors, new expectations from consumers, new expectations from civilians in a very different way. The way governments work, the way societal structures are architected, I think those get rebooted.
This is incredible background. I've been reading a book called Engines That Move Markets. And what the author does is he was the head of the head of research at Templeton Global, worked with Sir John Templeton, and he took, I think it was 12 or 13 of the major changes for society, from the railroads to telegraph, telephone, radio, and so on. And he comes to the conclusion that these new areas, as you've been describing now, it's very, very difficult to find the winners. Very difficult. But not so difficult to find the losers. And I'd like you to maybe share with us your thoughts on who the losers will be in this process, this 3 to 5 year process of, and I guess, don't worry if you don't actually get every single thing that Stafford's saying, because he does speak quite fast, but the changes that are coming, I think that you should know. Things are happening more rapidly. Competition is becoming more intense. Human potential is being unlocked. But who are going to be not who, but what maybe business areas are going to be the losers? And if you happen to be caught in one line of work, what is a danger for the person in that field?
I'll answer it in a few ways. So number one is, anything that can be measured in efficiency and productivity, a machine will do.
So what, accountant?
I think that's probably 80 to 90% of the jobs out there. I think you can measure it in efficiency and productivity. I think if you can measure it in that way, a machine will give you better output sustainably. It doesn't take leave. It doesn't need all the things that and it will catch up and it will do it. I think throughout history, if you take a look at we never lost as humanity. So if you look at the aggregate, we always seem to step forward as humanity, irrespective of what happens to us in a particular dispensation. So, the Luddites, burnt, all those things that could weave clothing.
Ned Ludd,
the Luddites, yeah. They burnt that because that was they protected their jobs at the time. They didn't want the loom to automate the weaving of clothes. But what they couldn't imagine was a future where a job wasn't weaving clothes, a job was designing a dress and walking on a runway in Milan, which is a form of wasting time. Our future is not to do things that you measure in efficiency and productivity. The future of the human race is to do things that waste time. We don't plow fields like we did in the year 1900. In the year 1900, if I did a poll, 98% of you in this room would be working in the agricultural sector. And 2% of you would not. Today, 2% of us work in the agricultural sector and 98% of us don't. But the farmer back then couldn't imagine a world where recipes and Michelin chefs and hors d'oeuvres and all these things that we come up with, master chefs, and we can't really. When technology enters the room, it does two things. First of all, it dissipates. And the second thing, it dematerializes everything. And it takes humanity out of the room. And that's a good thing. You know, why should we shouldn't till the soil. We shouldn't toil under the sun. That's not what we're there for. That's not our latent human potential. So I think moving forward, when you take that prognosis or you take a look at that theory and you apply it, I think there's a broad loss. There's a loss of jobs. There's a loss of identity. That's one way to define it. But I think we're undergoing a redefinition on a societal basis. We are rethinking everything. We are starting to realize, because of technology, how our human construct. We've actually not understood humans as much as we understand humans today because of technology. I met a developmental psychologist, and she told me they are only now starting to understand the pure human characteristic elements of forgiveness, because technology allows us to create perpetual memories. And a perpetual memory, like she said, is a paralysis to society. If we can forever remember, if we make machines that allow us to cast our lives into it, that we'll never forget. This is dystopian, because we need to have the ability to forget. The other thing is forgiveness. Kids walking into a school and blowing up the entire school. Where does that come from? How can that happen? It's never happened before. We are starting to see how when you say sorry as a child, how important the muscles in your face of the recipient of your apology is. And the way your face moves, what that does for me in terms of understanding sympathy, empathy on an elementary basis is so important. But when you put this glass pane, when you put this glowing rectangle between us, and suddenly an apology is just it's an emoji, that has an effect on us. That has an effect on how our children grow up.
But who are the losers?
I think let's just go pure economically speaking. I think Facebook's the loser in the next 3 to 5 years. I think they're a loser.
So VR is...
No, I think metaverse, the way he wants to do it, and us all going into his metaverse, I don't think that's what we want to do. Mm-hmm. I think because we've already seen Facebook being the dystopia. Like I said, Milton Friedman gave us a fitness function that gave us businesses with... look at our businesses today. We've got 5 businesses with a net asset value that outstrips the next 500 companies, the next 200 to 300 companies on the S&P 500. But they don't just outstrip them on net asset value, they outstrip them on the harvesting of humanity. If you take that graph or that scale and measure them based upon human attention, we've never seen anything like it. On human identity scraping, we've never seen anything like that.
If Facebook is a loser,
yeah.
The other FAANGs, are they also losers?
I think Microsoft's interesting because it's still got an enterprise play. I think Amazon, if they split AWS out, AWS becomes the most valuable business in the world, and it goes toe-to-toe with Apple, in my opinion. I think AWS sitting inside of Amazon.
And just explain what AWS is.
AWS was the first cloud platform. So, similar to the way, when in 2007, when the guy Steve Jobs got up on stage and he showed us the iPhone, he created an ecosystem around the platform. He gave us an API that allowed us to program and put applications on that phone. We call it the App Store today. Fast forward to Amazon. What Amazon did was something similar. They just took their infrastructure, their IT infrastructure, and they said, we have so much of it. Let's open it up and allow other companies to run their technology on top of our systems. And we're going to call that Amazon's Web Services. And luckily, the technology, the standards had caught up, and now there are more businesses that run in AWS, and they outstrip Amazon's value. The CIA runs all its services inside of AWS. Netflix runs inside of AWS. Keep going. The biggest Uber runs inside of AWS. The biggest businesses in the world, infrastructurally speaking, run inside of AWS. So I think if they split that out, AWS becomes the most valuable business in the world, in my opinion. I think Amazon, I don't know what happens to Amazon then. Then it's just a bookstore, marketplace thing. And I don't know if it could survive without the margins that AWS feeds it. I think Facebook is we all tired of it. I think there's fatigue. I think the kids are not in it. I think legislation will crush him in a lot of ways. I think metaverse is a head fake.
What's a head fake?
I think it's the biggest head fake we've seen, I don't know, since the early 70s, I think.
But what's,
what is it?
What
think
is a head fake?
He was so in trouble with privacy. He was so in trouble with the US Congress and the Senate and et cetera, et cetera. And he's so in trouble in every way. I mean, the people are dying because of what Facebook's doing in the world. You know, we saw it in the Far East uprising. We saw it in Ethiopia. We're seeing it, you know, what happens, the fake news that gets published inside of this platform and the mismanagement of that business and the way that business is run today. That business is the most dangerous business in the world today. That is actually the most dangerous entity in the world today.
So we got that in the business portfolio, Meta. You're saying get rid of it.
I'm not saying anything. I'm
No,
saying
no. Steph, come.
I wouldn't. Look, I don't own Facebook. I don't own Facebook. I think unless Mark does something, but I mean, it's such a metaphor for every single one of you that sits in this room is Facebook. Do not build businesses where the technologists drive solely the strategy. I think it's such a personification of the importance of diversity. You know, Facebook is run by an individual that's a brilliant engineer. But what that business needs is an anthropologist. What that business needs is a journalist. What that business needs is someone that understands Greek mythology. And a paleontologist. Mark Zuckerberg needs the humanities in that business. Someone that understands in history the Greek gods when they had power and wielded in this way. And those metaphors should play itself outside of him. Facebook is dystopian. It is exactly what we've warned everyone about in the technology field. When you have a sole fitness function called engagement, and you give a nerd superpowers like that, then you get what you got with Facebook right now. So I wouldn't own Facebook. Google, I worry about Google because I think a new network is building up and a new form of indexing content on the internet's changing. So I don't know, 5, 10 years from now, don't know.
Apple?
I always go back to 2007. And I've got a slide up, and I may have showed it the last time I presented here. And on that slide was Nokia. They had 1 billion customers, and the cover on Fortune magazine was, "Who can catch the cell phone king?" You know, if they can transition truly to services as a business, then I think it's a great stock to own. And every time Warren Buffett makes a move, I'm more skeptical than you. I know you're a Warren Buffett fan, I'm not. But I have a philosophical issue with him on a few things. But he owns a lot of Apple, and he's big on Apple. I think Apple's got a huge distribution network. Their pivot is on privacy, that they'll be the gatekeeper of your identity. I don't think that's going to play out well for them. I think there's some antitrust bumps in the road for them. I think Tim Cook's time, I don't know. If the problem with Apple is, what's their next big thing? Because anything that they do, if it's not big, they can't do it. They're actually too big to do a small thing. So will they do the car? Don't know. Will they do the VR or AR headsets? Don't know. Will there be a play in metaverse? Will there be the privacy gate that says, put your identity here because we'll protect you, which is kind of what they're saying to everyone? Will they win on that? At the end of the day, they're still an iPhone company.
Okay, so we've gone through Amazon.
Amazon, Apple, Facebook.
Microsoft
I
is
like.
interesting.
Google, I'm unsure of.
Okay. Now we got to finish off with crypto.
Yeah.
Last conference,
Yeah.
you got everyone really excited about crypto.
Yeah.
They got to understand that one day we'll all have NFTs. In fact, we nearly gave everyone an NFT.
Oh, really?
Nearly.
Oh, wow.
We were that far. Clive will tell you the story, but we didn't quite get there. But we were going to give everyone an NFT to come to this conference. It'll be their ticket. We haven't quite got there yet. But you explained these things to us. Give us an update.
So the last time I spoke, what happened was I think Bitcoin shot up a bit, and then it kind of dropped down quite a bit. I think we saw a lot of, I call them shitcoins. Other people call them altcoins. And we saw some projects, distributed finance projects, built on crypto, where people take crypto assets and they create, financial instruments that essentially utilizes those assets, and then you can lend against it, and et cetera. And we saw, the mechanics of that break, because that was based not on a 1-to-1 ratio with anything that had any relevance. And when Bitcoin dropped, a lot of these guys, like Warren Buffett says that, when the current pulls out, then you see who's not wearing clothes and who's not. Right. So we saw all of that. I think Here's my view, and I'll just reiterate it. I'm a Bitcoin maximalist. Okay, if you take a look at what the Fed is saying in the United States, if you take a look at what the SEC is saying about cryptocurrencies in the United States, I mean, we all kind of look at what they're saying. You know, the chairman, etc. Take a look at what they say. They talk about Ethereum, they talk about Solana, they talk about all these different projects. But when they get to Bitcoin, they agree that Bitcoin is the only commodity. It's the only one that doesn't have a CEO, doesn't have a board of directors, doesn't have shareholders, it doesn't have an headquarters. It's not domiciled in any particular jurisdiction. It is the only truly original, decentralized blockchain. It's the only one. Every other one came from it. So whenever someone talks to me about crypto, and they talk about all these other altcoins, I don't have a view because I don't trade in them. I don't believe in them. I think they're interesting scientific projects, but I think they're dangerous things to put money into. I think Bitcoin is something that you don't trade. Bitcoin is, in my opinion, the safest place to put your long-term property-orientated, if you want to think about it that way, assets. I think in 100 years from now, gold will be less. I think your real estate portfolio will be a joke. I think whatever you've got in fiat will be demonstrably affected. I mean, we have printed, I saw a statistic the other day, we have printed 65% of all the dollars in circulation today was printed in the last 36 months.
Yeah.
Well, that is not sustainable. The way the inflation is, I mean, it's what you could buy in 1974 when I was born for $1. You know, it's insane, like just the inflation rate. So people are waking up to this. This is the beauty of this new world. So my update to you is stick in it, because nobody that has invested in Bitcoin for 4 years or more has ever lost money. There's no one in the world that's ever put money into Bitcoin for 4 years or more and lost money. So it's something that
even buying at the absolute peak?
I don't. So yes, you know my view, and I'm going to say it on stage. I think it's the most undervalued asset class in the world today. There's nothing like it. We've never. For me, it is fire the wheel Bitcoin. I don't know of anything that has true scarcity in the world outside of Bitcoin. Gold is not true scarcity. It's just difficult to get to. And it's difficult to mine. And its bleed, is 1.8% a year. Bitcoin has something similar. I think it's at 1.5 to 1.7% a year. And its inflation, it keeps going down because less and less coins become available. It's 21 million cap. So every time the blockchain gets mined, the blocks get processed, we get more coins issued. So we've got a cap of 21 million. There's nothing in the world that is decentralized, cannot be shut down, is truly sovereign. No government can. I mean, just the other day, someone moved $84 million of Bitcoin, and it cost them 43 US cents. Try and move that amount of money in any other form, in any other way in the world, and it's impossible. You can't do it. And let me give you an update. So first of all, stay away from, in my opinion, all the other things. I don't know those other things. I can't vet for them because Ethereum has Vitalik and his crew, and they're forking right now to proof of stake. I'm not going to, unless you want to, but proof of work to proof of stake. You've got the other guys that have been either hacked or compromised. So the beauty of Bitcoin is its decentralization. It is the place where you can truly store value. No government can get to it. It's sovereign, and not when it sits inside of Luno or Valor. Okay, careful of that. Your Bitcoin needs to sit not in an exchange, because then you don't own your Bitcoin. Your Bitcoin needs to be air-gapped. It needs to be on you or in your secret way of storing it. People left Ukraine with all their wealth in their heads. It's never happened before in the history of mankind. People fled and they knew their keys, their Bitcoin keys in their heads. Try and leave with a bar of gold. Try and leave with a suitcase of money. People were leaving Ukraine with millions of dollars based upon a key in their head that they could remember. That's profound. So outside of its attributes, so what's very, very interesting and what I would encourage everyone in this room to do is to understand that Bitcoin is not growing up. What's happening in Bitcoin is very interesting on, let's call Bitcoin layer 1. There's a layer 2 and a layer 3 set of innovation happening on top of Bitcoin. And something that everyone of you in this room needs to understand, needs to comprehend. Please take this away. Go understand Bitcoin really, really well. There's a book there, the Bitcoin Standard and the Fiat Standard. Start with those two books. Exclusive books are there, and those two books.
Make the investment. It's
Make
like
the investment.
It costs you about $2,000 for the two books, but they've been brought in from overseas, and they're there, and you can't get them.
Yeah.
They're hard to access.
So if you wanted to start, if you haven't started, you want to understand it, just go read those two books. Once you've read those two books, I always ask somebody that argues against me, have you read those two books? If they haven't, then I don't want to have an argument. But read those two books, because no one has ever read those two books and came back to me and said, I don't know about this thing, or laughed at it, or this is like 1999 again. You know, I'm telling everyone about the internet, and they're laughing at me. They're like, this thing, yeah, okay, you put a magazine on it through a browser, great. You download a video, it takes 2 weeks. You connect to it, screams, it's stupid, it's dumb. You need a computer science degree to work it. Today, when I show people the crypto wallet, it's the same reaction. But this will have much bigger impacts. But the thing to understand outside of Bitcoin, so those of you that have invested, what's that next step? And this was going to be my talk this year, if we had done a keynote. I was going to talk about layer 2, and that is the Lightning Network. And this is a layer 2 technology that is as distributed and as freely available and as open source as Bitcoin, but it allows for value exchange instantaneously, and the cost is microcents. So instead of taking your Bitcoin gold and trading with your gold, which can take, a Bitcoin transaction can take a couple of hours to fully complete. It's still faster than Visa. Visa takes 3 to 5 days to complete. This takes, a few hours to complete. And it costs sometimes a lot of money. The gas fees, for lack of a better term, or the transactions cost is quite hectic with Bitcoin. But what's evolved on top of Bitcoin now is this peer-to-peer way of transacting with your Bitcoin. So to give you an example of what the Lightning Network is. Now imagine you walk into a bar. So I walk into the bar and I open up a tab with the barman. And he takes my credit card. Okay, there's my tab open. Alec walks into the bar and says, hey, Stafford, can I buy a drink off you? And then you tell the barman, yeah, just put it on my tab, give Alec the drink. Alec is using my channel that I've engaged with the bartender for that transaction. And then Alec says, okay, I'll pay you later, and I'm cool. Alec can walk into the bar, or later on he drinks, and he comes to me, he says, Staff, I have no money. I need money for a cab outside. I can go to the bartender and say, can you give him cash in your cash drawer, and then put it on my tab. That's layer 2. So think about us all being barmen, and everyone is a person that can do what I've just described in the bar on a global basis. So when I pay Jeanette, I can pay Jeanette through Alec. And then the settlement later happens on the Bitcoin network. But this is instantaneous. It's sovereign. It costs almost nothing. And you can do it anywhere in the world, instantaneously. This is what's happening in El Salvador today. They're paying each other not with the Bitcoin network layer 1. They're paying each other with layer 2 Lightning networks. Now, on top of layer 2 is layer 3, and that's the wallets that tap into this, like the Strike wallets and all the other wallets. That's layer 3. But understand the Lightning network. Google it, YouTube it. This is profoundly big, and it's laying latent, and not a lot of people understand it. But the Lightning network is the one that everyone should get into right now.
Well, Stafford, we've come to the end of our time. It's been fascinating, and I'm so pleased that you've been able to give us this hour. We do have a keynote with Stafford and Lisa tomorrow on the wellness revolution. So if you thought this was interesting, wait until you hear what the power couple of, well, I mean, I don't know if you're the power couple of the conference. I'm sure there are other power couples as well, but certainly...
We're not a power couple. She's the power woman.
She's the power woman.
I'm the Uber driver that comes along.
But if you did watch Lisa's interview that we did last week on the Biz News TV channel on YouTube, you'll see that we're in for a treat. Steph, it's always good talking with you.
Thank you.
And this has been fascinating. Thank you again, and look forward to tomorrow.
Yeah.
That's it for tonight.
Thank you for spending an evening with us. Appreciate it.